Hi folks, this is Kellyanne with Church Windows. Welcome to today's user group. Today we're going to look at the payroll module and how to create deductions and allowances and then add those to the actual employee file. So let me really quick here pause our screen sharing and get rid of this PowerPoint presentation. And let me bring up our payroll module. So now on screen you should see the opening screen for payroll. Real quick before we get started, if it's your first time using the GoToWebinar toolbar or interface, there is a section there, a question panel that you can open. And Josh is in the room with me today, and as I'm showing you how to add allowances and deductions and then add them to the employee file, Josh is available. If you type a question in the question panel, he can answer that for you. And then at the end of the user group, we'll open the floor and I can read those out loud and answer them. But try to keep your questions on topic today. It's, again, payroll, adding deductions and allowances, and then adding those to the actual employee file. So let's go ahead. Payroll is a separate module from your Church Windows module. If you're new to Church Windows, you'll notice on my desktop I have upper left the Church Windows, which opens up to membership, scheduler, accounting, and donations. Payroll, however, is a separate icon on your desktop. So I've already double-clicked to open that up. Now, if you're brand new to payroll, let me just hit F1 real quick and show you. If I hit F1, that brings up the help files. And what I'm going to show you today is step 4, entering the deductions and allowances and additional pay and then putting those on the employee file. But if you haven't even started yet, hitting F1 brings up this help file and it goes through the easy steps to begin using payroll. And if you've ever talked to me on the phone, probably wasn't for payroll. I'm not a payroll tech, but this is one of our new series of how do I start user group or webinars that just shows some basic things in different modules. So I'm guessing that's why I was assigned to this class, because I know the basics, so I can show you how to enter deductions and allowances and add those to the employee file. So this is one of those how do I start basic classes. But everything I'm going to talk about today will be within step 4 of this help file. And if you haven't even started using payroll, I would start with step 1 and work your way through these steps. But you can also call and ask us for help if you need to. Now, deductions, let's start with deductions. There's 2 types, voluntary deductions, and those are things that the church would deduct from the employer's or the employee's pay, like pension, insurance premium. Before we can add those to our employees, we have to set up the different deductions we need. Now, another type deduction you may or may not need is a miscellaneous state tax deduction. In addition to state income tax, some states collect other taxes like disability, state unemployment, and they take those from the employee's pay. Some of those have capped annual limits and others are based on the number of hours worked. We are not accountants here, so those kind of things you need to check on and see, what is taxable, non-taxable, if you have miscellaneous state tax deductions, and we can help you set those up. But we don't necessarily know the answer as to whether or not your employees need these different items. All right, so let's first look at adding a voluntary deduction like your insurance premium or pension. Today I'm going to add dependent care. Maybe you allow your employees to take a certain portion of their pay and set it aside for dependent care or child care. First, to do this, again, we can't just add it right to the employee file. We have to go first. We have to click on Data Setup and Deductions file. And notice we already have 4 different deductions set up. These are, I like to think of just the general setup or name of the different deductions. There's nothing specific here. Well, there are some specific things, but some of these things we can actually change on the employee file if we need to. So to add this dependent care deduction, I'm going to click Add right here up at the top. brings up an add deduction window, and here in description I'm just going to type in dependent care. After I put the description, I can choose a frequency or how often it's going to come out of the pay. Now, whatever the default is you choose here, this is something you can change on the actual employee file. So we'll just leave it at every pay. And then if this is, we'll talk about the miscellaneous state tax check mark here. We're going to leave that unchecked because this is just a regular voluntary deduction. If you need to, you can check to show this separately on the W-2 and choose what box that's going to go in as well. And then you can also check or uncheck if that is taxable and should be included in the W-2 wages. I'm going to uncheck because dependent care, at least I know when I had the dependent care, that was non-taxable. That was taken out prior to all the taxes. So we'll uncheck those. And then I'm just going to click OK to have it add that new deduction. And we see it here. ID is assigned by the system. But we see dependent care, frequency, every, and W-2 box, none of these. We didn't check any of these, and it's not a miscellaneous tax, so that's not checked either. Also, I want to show, we're going to add the miscellaneous state tax. Excuse me. But notice if we click the little box to the left of any of these, and then you look down at included W-2 wages, we can see what's been selected for each of these. Now, so far they're all the same, but when we get to 403B pension, we can see a little different here. And then lower right on this deductions file screen, we can see for each of the different deductions we've set up our monthly totals, and that a total for 2016 so far for the payroll we've run. Also on this deduction file screen, if we highlight a deduction, we can click on list employees to bring up a report showing which employees have this deduction already on their payroll employee file and totals for those as well. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to click apply so it holds that new dependent care that I added. And let's look at adding a miscellaneous state tax deduction. So I'll click add. Now, for example, let's say your state requires that 1% of the first $50,000 of the employee's wages are withheld for a state disability fund. So let's go ahead and we'll call this state disability. And we're going to leave the frequency at every pay. And we want to go ahead and put a check here in miscellaneous state tax because this is our miscellaneous state tax. All right, notice when we do that, it opens up the area down here to the lower right, the tax rate and annual limit. But first, if we need this to show separately on a W-2, we can check this box. And then we could indicate once we do that where we want it to show. Let's go ahead and we'll go down. This rate we said is 1%, so we'll enter the 1% as 1.0. And then we're going to enter an annual maximum amount. That is subject to tax, so we'll put a dot here. And then we'll put in that maximum amount of $50,000 and then click OK. And now we see our new state disability, and it is checked here to show that that is a miscellaneous tax. Then I can click apply. And once I'm done, I can click OK, and I've set up those new deductions and they're ready to add to an employee file when I need to. Let's go ahead, before we add anything to employee files, let's go ahead and look at adding an allowance. Allowances, excuse me, if a payment is not taxable or you need more than 3 expense accounts to allocate pay, then you can enter these in the allowances file. And we access that again by clicking on Data Setup and choosing Allowances file. We see here some allowances already set up, our housing, automobile, mileage allowance. We're going to go ahead and set up a cell phone allowance. Maybe your church allows pays for part of his cell phone. So again, we have the same options here. We can see a list of the employees that have each of these different allowances. Lower left, we can decide if these are included in the W-2 wages, and lower right, the monthly totals for whichever one we've highlighted. Let's go ahead and add our cell phone allowance. We'll just click Add, and for description, we'll type in cell phone. We only have one person we're doing this for, and they've determined they don't need this out of every pay. We're just going to do this the first pay of the month. And again, here we can determine if we want to show that separately on the W-2 and if that would be included in the W-2 wages. If it's not taxable, then you can clear all these boxes. But again, that we are not accountants, so you want to check on these things. And once we have that added, we can click OK. And now we see our new cell phone allowance added to our allowance file. To hold this, we need to click Apply in the lower right. And then we can click OK to exit out of here. Now we're ready to go ahead and add these to any employees who need these deductions or allowances. So we're going to go now to Data Setup and then Employee File. The employee file in the upper left is a list. If we click the arrow just to the right of that, we see a list of all of our different employees. If we choose an employee, we'll pick Steve Jones. We can see what we've entered so far, identification information, general information about his pay. Lower right, notice there's different tabs. And here's where we've already gone in and filled in our general 1 and 2, anything we needed for federal, state, and local. And we're going to look at the deductions tab. Now he already has some deductions we've added, but he's told us he'd like to use the child care deduction or allowance, deduction, sorry. So to add that, I'm just going to click in the next blank line right in the ID box. When I do, notice now I have an arrow, and I can click on that drop-down arrow, and it is showing me deductions that currently are not on this gentleman's employee file. That's why I'm only seeing 3, and I'm not seeing the health care, the 403B pension, because those are already on Steve's file. We're going to add the dependent care, so we'll just click here to add that. It fills in the information from what I already added when we set that up over in the setup for deductions. Now, if I want to change the frequency of how often this is coming out of the pay, I can just click right here under frequency. Maybe he wants that to come out of just his second pay. So I can click and change the frequency if needed. And I can do that for each employee. All employees could have a different frequency, or I can just leave it at the default. And then I can click over an amount or percentage, and I can elect to either have a dollar amount deducted or a percentage of his pay. He's told us he'd like $100, so we'll go ahead and put in 100. And then lower right, I can click Apply to have it hold this. And now we see that dependent care added to Steve Jones' deductions file. Now let's go ahead and just add the miscellaneous state tax. I'll show you one here, the state disability. We'll add that. Notice if I click on frequency, I cannot change the miscellaneous, any deduction I've set up as a miscellaneous state tax, I cannot change that frequency. Now I can click over here and put an amount, but it's already filled in the percent, so I don't need to do that. So then I can click Apply to have it hold that. And we see the 2 new deductions we've added to Steve's employee file. We also want to go ahead and add the cell phone allowance for Steve. So down bottom, kind of middle-ish now, we'll click on the Allowance tab. And now the screen over here to the right side shows any allowances Steve currently has on his record. We're going to click here in ID. And to add cell phone, we can just click right on cell phone. Now it's defaulting because we had set that cell phone up with a frequency of first pay per month. It's defaulting to what we set it up as. But again, we can change that. If another employee gets a cell phone allowance and they prefer it to be taken out differently, we can change that frequency right on the employee file. But then we need to click here and put in a dollar amount. Maybe we've said we'd pay $50 of that. And then we'll click apply to have it hold that. And now we have added that allowance to Steve's employee file. So if we take a look here at deductions, we've added 2 new deductions to his employee file. And then our allowances tab, we've added that cell phone allowance. Now if you need to delete a deduction, we can do that. Maybe Steve no longer needs the automobile flat rate allowance. To delete something from the employee file, I simply highlight that line and then I use the delete button on my keyboard. I hit delete and that removes that from his record. It would work the same way if I went to the deductions file. Now if you actually want to delete, whoops, I'm not going to exit. I'm going to click no. It's asking do I want to exit and lose current changes. I'm going to say no because I want to click lower right on apply. So it holds those changes and now click OK. Now if I need to delete a deduction or allowance that I don't need on any of my employee files, I don't use it anymore, you can go into data setup and then deductions file. Now watch what happens if I click on say health insurance, which is on many files, it's been used already this year. If I click delete, the program is really smart. It sees that's associated with payments made in my current payroll year and you cannot delete that. So it will not let you delete an allowance or deduction that's been used this current year. Now if it's just on a person's file but it hasn't been used to calculate any payroll, say this dependent care, I could go ahead and delete that. The message is different. It does recognize that is assigned to an employee record, but because I have not used it yet, it is going to allow me to delete that if I'd like. So if I decide I really don't need that dependent care deduction, I can go ahead and say yes, I want to delete that. Now if I were to click OK here, oops, now I thought apply. I thought I would have to hit apply. I apologize. I was going to say I needed to hit apply or it wasn't going to hold that change, but it does hold the delete without clicking apply. Now if I were to go and look at Steve's employee file, because we deleted that dependent care, notice now he only has 4 deductions listed because I deleted that dependent care from the actual deduction file where we set up the general information for the deductions or allowance. Because it's deleted from this deduction file, that will delete it from any records I added it to. But again, remember, I hadn't calculated any pay that used that yet, so that is why it allowed me to delete it. Had I calculated a pay where that dependent care deduction had been used, then the program would have given me the same message as with our health insurance. It would have told us that that's associated with payments in this current year and it cannot be deleted. All right, so adding deductions and allowances, creating the general information for those, and then going into the employee file and adding those to our different employees is pretty easy. Again, if you're newer to the program, if you hit F1, that does bring up, when you're in payroll, if you hit F1, the first file it brings up is the easy steps to begin using payroll. And we were looking at step 4. So if you're just starting with payroll, you'll want to complete steps 1 through 3 before you move on to 4. But this is a great help topic to help you get everything set up in payroll so you can get started calculating payroll. But again, remember, things are specific to different states. So you might need to check with the IRS or your state to see what is taxable versus non-taxable and what needs to be in different boxes. Okay, someone asked if you delete a deduction from an employee file after there had been a deduction in the current year, but it is no longer needed, will it still show on the W-2? Um, well, you can't delete it in the year that it was used. If you mean if I delete it in 2016, but it was used in 2015, those 2015 reports, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, those 2015 reports would still report on that deduction because it still exists in your 2015 deductions file. So deducting it in the current year is not going to affect it being used or having been used in prior years and reports showing that deduction in the prior years. But if you've used it in 2016, it's not going to let you delete that deduction from the employee file. Are there other questions? Because I've shown you everything I wanted to show you for adding deductions and allowances, or setting them up and then adding them to the files. Stopping a deduction during the same calendar year. Josh, I'm pretty sure, again, I know the basics of payroll, but once we get into more details, I don't know the answers to those. So let me look. I think we can delete it from their file. Let's see. That one has been used. So it appears I can delete that even though it has been used this year. And correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, deleting it from the employee file, it's still going to report on what was already processed for the year, but then deleting it from the employee file is going to prevent it from being used anymore when you calculate payroll. Please, Josh, if that is not correct, please message me that. Okay. Okay, Valerie has a really complex question, and I think that would be best to call in and speak with a payroll tech because I do not know the answer to that. Maybe Josh can type an answer to you. Um, but yeah, that's a little beyond just setting up and adding deductions and allowances. I apologize. I don't know the answer to that. Okay, Josh said it won't let you delete a deduction if it's been used in the current year. Um, However, it's allowing me to delete them from the employee file. So I'm guessing Josh means it's not going to let me delete the setup back in the deduction setup screen. Let's just say yes. And so what I'm thinking Josh is answering there is no, I cannot delete it here because that's been used on different payrolls. But the question they were asking Josh was on the actual employee file, if a deduction is no longer going to be used, can I delete it? And the program, if I highlight health insurance, we do see that Mr. Larry Higgins it's been used this year, but it's allowing me to delete it. Okay, so yes, he did answer that question again, typed the answer there, and yes. So on the employee file, if you want a deduction or allowance to end, you just do what I showed you right there, just highlight it and either delete it, or I could change my amounts to 0 or 0%. You're welcome, you're welcome. Any other questions? So again, setting up the deductions and allowances and adding them to the file is pretty easy. I'm not a payroll tech again, but I know the basics. So you saw it was really easy for me to add those. You do, though, again, a reminder, we're not accountants here, and we don't know all the different tax rules for different states and what might apply to your employees versus here in Ohio. So we may not be able to tell you if something is or is not tax deductible. We don't want to misinform you, okay? It's not that we don't want to give you an answer. We don't want to tell you the wrong answer and have your your employees' pay not be properly taxed or taxed too much. So some of those things you do need to check and know yourself whether that item is taxable on the different levels. Any other questions? I apologize. I went over by 5 minutes. If you need to leave, just exit the GoToWebinar. Thank you for coming. But if there's other questions, we can stay and answer questions. If you're in the middle of typing a question, go ahead and hit enter. And that way I won't close the room on you, and then you can continue typing the rest of it. That way it'll alert me that you're still typing. All right, well, I'm not seeing any half-typed questions getting sent. So I hope you did learn something new today. If you have any other questions or if something was more in depth and we weren't able to answer it during the user group today, definitely give us a call, or you can email questions to support@churchwindows.com. Thanks so much for attending, and we do record these webinars, and every Thursday they do get cleaned up and standardized and added to our YouTube channel. So if you want to watch this again at a later time, check out our YouTube. Just look up Church Windows, and there are a slew of videos out there on all the different modules. Thanks again for attending, and have a great day. Bye.